looks like it's working.
It says meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. You want me to go take a look?
Not yet. It's still setting it up.
Okay.
So I just want to know if it's working. Yay. Looks like it's working. Hooray. Okay. All right, I'll make you the host again.
Oh, don't we? And then I'll let you share the screen.
Okay, I can do that as a co-host anyway.
There we are.
Yep, and then.
Why are people waiting at 7 o'clock?
I don't know. Okay, so you can see, there we are. You're seeing our YouTube.
So if anyone's watching.
Okay. Which I have muted, by the way. Actually, let me. Okay. So you can see, there we are. You're seeing our YouTube. Trippy. Okay. So you're able to hear that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'll stop the share. Okay.
But what you put something up on the screen though, right? So that when people start watching it, they see some other image?
No, but no one's going to start watching it before 7:30 anyway, hopefully.
But what if they do? Shouldn't we put something up there?
Yeah, I can do that. It just means I can't use my computer for anything else right now.
Yeah, well, I can do that. What should we put up?
Just put the Labor Council logo. I have that. I can put that up. Actually, yeah, it's better if you do it because I need to prepare to like post things on social media.
Oh, you know what? Maybe I'll just put the agenda up.
Yep. If you want, I can send you the Labor Council logo to put, or you have it because you use it as your background.
Yeah, because the agenda actually, oh yeah. No, the agenda doesn't have the logo on it. Okay. I'll just do something with the.
Okay, I'm just going to turn off my video.
Okay. Great, Word isn't responding.
Of course not.
Yeah, so shut it right down.
Okay.
No, it's okay. I just want to, oh, you know what? I should do it in PowerPoint, actually. Okay, then I will go here and I will share the screen. No, I'm gonna go back, stop share, and then I can't get that.
There you go. That works.
Except now oh, there's Ponche. Will I let him in?
Yeah, I was going to call him, but we'll let him in and we'll just explain what's happening, I guess. Ponche.
Hi, this is Panche here.
Hi, it's Skylar and Susan. It looks like we were able to get the YouTube live working today, so I think you're off the hook.
All right.
Yeah.
I was getting nervous there. That's good. Did you figure out what the issue is, or is it just a
No,
chance thing?
just decided to work today.
Yeah. So you did the same thing that you've always done, and it just worked.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, well that's good.
Yeah.
So I'll log out.
Yeah, I don't think we need you. Yeah, I mean, you're welcome to watch if you want to, but yeah, I think you're fine to go.
Okay.
Bye, Ponche. Bye, Ponche. It's Susan.
Oh, hi, Susan. Hi.
Nice to see your name.
Sorry?
Nice to see your name there.
Oh, yeah. It's been a while since we've seen each other in person. But
yeah,
we keep in touch by email.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, well, have a good meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thanks
for
coming on.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye. Okay. Susan, I'm going to mute myself for now, and then just let me know if you want me to come back on for anything.
Sure. Okay. So if I speak to you, you'll hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to go back and continue sharing the screen. Okay. Oh, I know one other thing. Skylar, if you're there.
Yep.
So you said right now the YouTube live is on mute?
No, it's not. Someone could hear us if they're not, if they're looking at it. But I'm not going to share it until closer to 7:30.
Oh, I see. When you say share, what do you mean? Oh, like post?
We posted on Facebook and Twitter.
Right.
So like it's up, but like nobody's going to go on there until 7:30.
Okay. Okay. See you in a bit.
Okay.
Hey, Susan.
Hello, Mohammed.
What's happening?
So we are on Facebook Live. So if anybody goes to our Facebook site, they'll be able to hear us talking.
No, we're on YouTube.
We're on
Not
YouTube, not Facebook.
That was a test. Yes, we're on YouTube.
Do you want to flip it over? Make me a host or co-host or?
Yeah, so I'll take down the lovely little picture there. How did you get in?
Me.
Ah, okay. That's weird. Where are we?
I think planet Earth.
I know, but it's okay. I'm gonna close chat. There we are. There.
Mohammed, I just went with the clips that you sent me. So
Oh,
I'm assuming they're at the right spot. I had to do it at the last minute, so they're queued up to where you said.
they're not exactly like those numbers.
Well, they're queued up to like where the person starts talking.
Good enough. Should we let the 6 people in?
I think we're just gonna wait until Jennifer comes on.
Okay.
Because they don't need to be in until closer to 7:25 anyway.
Okay. We're not doing a practice run on Zoom anyways, right?
No. Yeah, so 7 people are waiting. Yeah, so I guess one more minute. And oh, look at what you've got behind you, a nice lighthouse.
Yeah. It's not gonna work.
You need a green screen behind you.
Yeah, this camera on this laptop is something to talk about.
Here comes Jennifer. Hello. Hi. Hi.
Hi. Just a heads up, we are already live on YouTube, but no one's watching right now. Good idea to put up a screensaver.
So you can, oh yeah, you can tell if somebody's watching. Can you tell from here if somebody's watching, or do you have to do it from the YouTube channel?
It's in the YouTube stream. So if you open it up using that button at the top left, like view the stream, then you'd see. It says like 1 or 2 people are on, so it's probably us.
There's John and there's Maureen. I'll let them in. Welcome.
Hi there. Maureen, I'm in the office and guess what? The printer doesn't seem to work.
Oh, God.
So just so that you know, we are on YouTube live at the moment, although Skylar says nobody's watching us.
Well, that's good.
It will be recorded for later on, though.
Yeah, it will be, but then I'll ask the new person to take it down and cut it so it starts at the beginning, and then put it back up.
John, do you want me to let Bob Leslie know that the printer is now not working for you either?
Sure, if you could do that, we appreciate it. Because I'd love to run off the agenda, but I can't do that now.
You know, if you could figure out, John, how to go into my office and plug into the one that's on my desk, you could do it there, but then that would potentially require you to install printer drivers.
I got a couple minutes. Let me try that.
Hmm? Yeah. So I don't see anybody on their phone who's waiting. It's 7:22.
Somebody trying to win the cutest baby contest again?
He got his head shaved yesterday.
Yeah, look at that, man. Great job.
Hi, Caleb.
Hi, say hi. Hi. Want to tell them that you're a big boy? Can you use the potty?
Susan, where is the printer?
It should be on
Oh, it's right there.
against the wall. Yeah.
Did you wet the bed today?
It's wet.
Yeah, your bed is wet, right?
Yeah, because I almost gonna pee on it.
Peed in your sleep. It's okay. We all do
You better hope that no one's watching on YouTube.
it. I'm gonna stop this.
Oh, and I'll make Jennifer.
Co-host.
Papa?
Yeah, co-host.
And you know what? I better make John a co-host so that he stays up near the top. And then I'll
I want that, Mama.
when
John
voting.
should be spotlighted, right?
No.
Yeah, but it doesn't need to yet. Also, Susan, you might want to, if you want, you can just put up your screensaver again. But I don't know.
But then I can't. Then I can't
Yeah.
do anything. Oh, but you guys can let people in if you need to.
Yeah, we're monitoring. There's 9 people in the waiting room. Should I let them all in?
Not give it another minute.
Okay, I'll let them in at 7:25.
Yeah, the Facebook post is going to go live at
Yeah.
7:50. So that'll be up there.
You're streaming live on Facebook as well as YouTube?
Not streaming live, but it'll get like the YouTube link will get posted on Facebook.
Oh, okay, I see.
Oh. If I could do a fax from my laptop, I could fax the agenda to John. Let me allow.
15 people are waiting. Should I let them all in?
Yeah, we should do that.
Admitting.
John, do you want me to go and try and fax it to you?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome, welcome. If you could kindly rename yourselves to your name and your local, that would be great.
Bill Signal, Local 46, Lovers and Steamfitters.
Bill, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. I will rename you here.
Yes, thank you, dear.
If you want to speak, Bill, just simply put star, and I think it's 9, star 9, and we'll see your hand raised. But if you could mute yourself, that would be great.
Hello? Hello?
Hi.
Sounds like Bill
Hi,
Saquon.
Shane Wickens
No, Shane Wickens.
from Carpentersville, 27.
Thank you.
Hello, Miguel, 4400.
Hi, Miguel, welcome.
Thank you.
Everybody, we're just gonna ask that if you are coming on, just to prevent feedback, if you can mute yourself until you wish to speak. And when you do wish to speak during the meeting, you can just simply press at the bottom, raise hand.
Joy Davis, QP 4400.
Sequence and the countdown, and you
Are you on the phone or are you on
go up
your computer?
Jennifer, it's Joy from QP 4400. I think I'm on the phone.
Okay, I'm just looking for you through my screen and I'm gonna rename you.
Me? I'm not on the phone. I'm not on computer. I'm on the phone.
Okay. Thank you, Joy. Sorry, I just wanted to ask everybody, who is 416-456-4528?
Hi, it's Ingrid Buckinger, QP 4400.
Okay, thank you, Ingrid. I'm going to rename you because you're up from the phone.
Okay, thank you very much.
So Ingrid, if you wish to speak, simply press *9 and John, who's calling you. In the meantime, if you're on the phone or on your computer, you can mute yourself until you're speaking, prevent feedback noise.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, who's speaking?
Hello. Susan Conliffe, SEIU Healthcare Local 1.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, who is this?
This is Marianne Camiso from QP 2321.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm going to rename you.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, is that Kim?
Kim Nasello. Yes, it is.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Our meeting's gonna temporarily, we'll start soon. If people just came on, just hold on tight.
Yep, no worries.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi there, Sean Blake.
Hi.
Hi, Dora Mahoney, QP 4400.
Welcome, welcome.
Hey Jennifer, how are you?
Good. How are you, Sean?
Not too bad, not too bad.
Our meeting is gonna start soon, but if you guys have just joined us, we're gonna ask everybody to just mute themselves so we can we don't have feedback noise in the background.
Absolutely.
And if you haven't done so, maybe just rename yourself on Zoom so we can see your name clearly. I'm gonna ask the person on the phone, 647-500-3437.
Yes.
Who, could you name yourself and your local so I could rename you?
Yeah, sure. It's Dora Mahani, QP 4400.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. It's John Cartwright, President of Toronto and York Regional Labour Council. Welcome everybody that's on the line tonight, and I'm sure some more will be joining us in a moment. We have a very full agenda tonight, and as you know, we have guest speaker, Rima Burns-McGowan, Member of Provincial Parliament for Beaches East York. We're going to be talking about 2 years of the Ford government's record. We will be bringing forward a special statement on racism on the front page, and also talking about the financial crisis facing our cities and public services, including transit, childcare, shelter, housing, and other social services. So I think we're going to share the agenda on the screen for a moment. Susan, if I can ask you to do that. And if we could ask people to mute themselves and until they're recognized.
Yeah, it'll take me just a minute to find the agenda, and I will have it up there.
Okay, so we're going to do the roll call of officers virtually because we know who's on the line. Jennifer, could you read the harassment statement, please?
Sure. Harassment statement. Mutual respect, cooperation, and understanding are strongly held principles of the trade union movement. We will neither condone nor tolerate harassing or discriminatory behavior that creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment and undermines the dignity or self-esteem of any individual. An injury to one is an injury to all. Speech or conduct which is racist, sexist, homophobic, or discriminatory in any way is unacceptable to trade unionists and only serves to divide us. Our policies and practices must reflect this commitment to equality as we work together for justice and dignity in our workplaces, our unions, and our communities.
Thanks, Jennifer. As we know, we start each meeting with a land acknowledgement. We are meeting on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, which was subject to the Dish with One Spoon Treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Sisters and brothers, since we last met, we lost an amazing trade union leader, a sister, a mentor, a fierce warrior for social justice, Sister Megan Whitfield from the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Until recent, she served as the president of that local, and many of you will have seen Sister Whitfield at the microphones of our Labour Council, of other organizations, the Federation of Labour, Canadian Labour Congress conventions, and of course, out on the streets, fighting and raising her voice for social justice. We've also, the executive board has approved a donation to a fund in Megan's memory. And we'd like to observe a minute's silence for Megan, for George Floyd, for all of the victims of COVID-19. If you could please join with me for a moment's silence. Thank you very much. Rest in power, Sister Whitfield. Mohammed, could you just walk people through the Zoom process, including the chat?
Yeah. So if you want, so we're gonna have a couple of things that you're gonna use for your processing. One is I'm gonna be putting up polls or votes for when we need to vote on items, and you'll see it'll pop up on your screen. You'll just click yes, no. For people on the phone, I'm not really sure if there's a mechanism for you to vote or not, but we'll trust that if there's something of contention, you'll raise it. For the chat function, feel free to use it for everybody as much as you like. However, if you do want to speak and get on the speakers list, please raise your hand so then John can recognize you one by one. And other than that, if you're having any technical issues or any of those things, please just send a message to myself or Skylar or Jennifer. We can help you out there. And at all times, please make sure that you mute yourself, especially if you're on the phone. If you're on the phone and you haven't muted yourself, we can hear everything. So please do so. And just to protect the sound quality of the video and today's meeting, please make sure that you're muted yourself. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. So the minutes and the other documents were sent out to all delegates electronically. And we're not going to put them up on the screen because there are too many pages. But we're assuming we have a motion to move and second the minutes. Are there any errors or omissions that anybody's seen on those minutes? Put your hand up and get recognized. Just give that a minute, and if none, then Mohammed will put up a vote function for a vote to accept the minutes as circulated.
John, how do I put, oh, never mind. Never mind.
Okay.
I think that should be good, John.
Okay, that motion is passed. Either Doug or David, the credential report. Is Doug on the line? Doug Jones? You can unmute yourself. And if not Doug, David Kidd.
Yeah, credentials report, there's two new delegates from the Brewery Workers Local 325.
Okay, and that motion to accept the credentials report, again, we'll put up a vote. Please, yes or no or abstain. Thank you. Okay, while we're waiting for that vote to come in, as people know, Mohammed had put together a series of video featuring frontline workers, and I'm going to ask him to introduce it, and then we'll play some of the videos from the episode 3. Mohammed.
So we had our third episode of Voices from the Front Lines, and we had 3 members. We had Camilla Brown, who's a worker in the shelters from CP Local 79. We had Mary from Owekta York Region, who's an elementary teacher. And we had Ed Cunningham from ATU 113, which is the TTC Transit. And then we also had Filomena from Filomena Ferraro, the president of Owekta York Region. We had Carlos Santos from ATU 113. And we had, I can't remember her name, but from the unit officer for the shelters from QP Local 79. And I think Skylar's going to play a couple of clips that talk about what some of their experiences are.
Okay, if someone could just let me know that you are hearing the audio before I get too far into this, as soon as I hit play.
We had one client come in the other day because he was asked to leave. He was living in a rooming house. There was like, I think he said 25 people in this rooming house. And because one of the persons had the COVID, everybody else was kicked out of the dwelling. So of course you're left with somebody who can barely afford to pay rent and just renting a room. And those things are far and few between. So he had nowhere else to go but the shelter.
That's wow.
And he came to the shelter and we actually couldn't give him a bed because we just didn't have one.
What happened to that?
We had to refer him to central intake and hope that they would be able to help him. But more often than not, a lot of our clients are on the street because we can't help them, or we're not able to help them because there's just not enough beds. I think that they're trying in their own way. We are having, I know that we've had difficulties with PPEs. We're getting them, that they're very few and scarce and they keep running out. So we end up certain times during the shift without them. We have issues about, wearing PPEs when we have codes. And a lot of the time our codes predict that we actually don't have time to even put them on so that we can deal with situations. So that's one of the big issues that keep coming up, saying, yeah, the PPEs are in the office with the shift leader, the door's locked. So if somebody's fighting, we've got to wait for the shift leader to come back to open the door, get the PPEs, and then we can get, and it's just not practical. So, we've been told, okay, you get PPE when you come on shift and you carry it with you all the time, but still, in the interim, you have sometimes seconds to defuse a situation, and it does not give you time to put on your PPEs.
Having a certain way of or a certain expectation of teaching, and that has gone on, away for us. And where we had to dive into with very little training and very little time. To distance emergency crisis learning. It's not e-learning, as was mentioned by Mary. It's very different. The goal is to keep our kids engaged and to keep some normalcy in their lives right now, because they're trying to understand what's going on in the world. And it's very hard for a child to understand why they can't go out to the park, why they can't be with their friends, why they can't see their teacher every day and share lunch with their best friends on a daily basis. Like, this is a very confusing time for them. And teachers, as well as other frontline workers, have to deal with the challenges of work and the challenges of home life and what that brings about. And of course, mental health issues are very important for us as a local union. We want to ensure that our workers, our teachers, have the tools for mental health resources should they want to tap into it for themselves, for their children, for their partners, as well as we want to ensure that our students are also reaching out to the right agencies if they're having coping issues right now because their lives have been turned upside down.
And I saw that there were over 100 members of the ATU local over there, or New York Transit operators, and that were infected and died from COVID-19. Over 100 people were infected and died in their workplaces. When you see that news, what does that like? How do you process that?
Well, there's also over 1,000 members across the U.S. that have actual COVID-19 as well. So that's why it's really scary for our members. And I don't find it unreasonable to be asking for PPE. And I remember the very first time I asked for it, I was called irresponsible by certain politicians just for asking for PPE. So because I'm asking for PPE for our members, I'm irresponsible. Like, I think that's just ridiculous. And as Ed has mentioned before, if we don't know what the issues are, we cannot fix them. So I encourage all the members out there, or all unionized members, just let your union know, because if your union doesn't know, they can't help you with the problems.
Yeah, just to add to that, the episode was around public services. And the person from QP Local 79 was Carolyn Ambrose. She's the shelter unit officer for QP Local 79. But in all three of their experiences with Ed and Camilla, as well as Mary, you could see that the reality is that for frontline workers that are working within the public sector right now, it's incredibly challenging. They don't know exactly what their work circumstances are going to look like, but yet they have to go into work because we're all depending on them. And the fact that, in Camilla's experience, especially as a shelter worker, she was noting that there were so many new people that were coming in who, who had fallen on harder times, and that there was no place for them to go. And the reality is, and the difference between shelter workers and the long-term care homes, where the two most vulnerable environments are, is that at least in long-term care, there's nobody coming in and out. But in shelters, pretty much everybody has to leave during the daytime, and then at nighttime, they're coming back in. And maybe the same people are coming back in, and maybe not. So it just shows you that there was an incredible amount of sacrifice that these frontline workers were making, and still going to work with incredible amount of pressure and tension. And we just want to say thank you to all those who are still out there working, and wanted to recognize that it's because of them that our society is still functioning. So thank you very much for watching the program. But also, if you want to watch the entire program or the other episodes, you can find them on our the Facebook feed for the Labor Council, or if you go to Labor Council and if you just Google Labor Council /YouTube, you'll find our channel and you can watch all 3 episodes over there. Thanks, John.
Mohammed. Thanks, Mohammed. Those are really powerful voices from the front line that we've had on all 3 episodes. And actually, they're going to be featured on the front cover of our Labor Action magazine that's just finished in the print shop and should be in the mail next week to everybody. It's 2 years ago that Doug Ford and the Conservative Party was able to sweep to power in Ontario. We have watched the turmoil in the last 2 years. We've got a statement coming to you in a couple of minutes named that 2 years of turmoil. And it's been an incredible time for every one of our unions and also our communities, resisting the vicious cuts that were brought in by that government. And our education affiliates, teachers and support workers, education workers have been on the front lines almost for a full year, engaged in a ferocious battle to protect publicly funded education and the quality of education that's provided to our students across this province. Just about 2.5 years ago, I had the privilege of meeting somebody called Rima Burns McGowan. She was a professor at U of T Mississauga, a human rights leader and teacher, and was putting herself up for public office in Beaches, East York, the place where I happen to live, for the New Democratic Party. And we sat down and had a coffee and talked about the journey that she had taken in her life to come to a decision to run for political office. But it's not the first time she's been political. Almost her entire life has been about the politics of social and racial justice, the politics of helping people to find their voice, and of finding the way to unlock some of those really difficult situations that have kept people from enjoying shared prosperity in our world. So Rima is with us tonight. We've asked her, to talk for a little while about what she's seen as a member of provincial parliament in Queen's Park, in our communities, and really give us a snapshot of what has been happening in this last period of time and how we need to work together to try and make sure we have a better Ontario in the future. So Rima, I'm going to hope that somebody will unmute you and put you on camera video, and we're welcoming you to our delegates meeting.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, John, and good evening, brothers and sisters. I wish we could all be there together. No matter how many times I do this, it's always really weird to be just me and a screen. I know that you have a 2-year sort of overview coming up after this. And so what I want to do in the time that I've been allotted is actually to deep dive into some of the issues that Camilla was talking about. Because as the critic for poverty and homelessness, I think that this issue of how homelessness is being mismanaged by the Ford government is a perfect microcosm of how the whole government is working. We have here a situation where, in fact, homelessness was in crisis before COVID-19. And in January, in fact, I called on, as the critic, the government to call homelessness an emergency, which would allow them to free up money to be able to spend on the sector to build more shelter space, but then also emergency housing, and to really get that moving. And then COVID-19 happened. And of course, they paid no attention to that call whatsoever. And then COVID-19 happened. And so you have a sector that is already in crisis. In Toronto, we have about 60% of the homeless folks in the province of Ontario, which means that 40% is in the rest of the province. So what's happening here, and what I'm going to describe happening here in Toronto, is actually happening throughout the province. So you have shelters that are way overcrowded. You have respite centers that are way overcrowded. You have drop-ins, which don't even have beds, that are way overcrowded. And as Camilla was saying, when it's not even possible to get somebody space in a shelter. But on top of that, the shelters are obviously not safe. There cannot possibly be 6 feet of space between beds. And so they're petri dishes for COVID. And so they're incredibly dangerous. On top of the fact that they're incredibly dangerous, as Mohammed was saying, people go out during the day. And for the first couple of months of COVID, it was cold out there. So people were being sent out during the day. Nobody was being tested. There wasn't adequate PPE, as you were hearing. So nobody actually knew who might have COVID and who might not have COVID. There's also a theory that epidemiologists have shared with me that when folks have had colds and flus, which are endemic in the population of people experiencing homelessness, then first of all, you don't necessarily know whether what you have is COVID or whether what you have is a flu. But on top of that, it is many folks who have experienced those things were getting COVID, but didn't know that they had it. So they were asymptomatic for COVID, which meant because nobody was being tested, we have no idea how it was being spread, whether it was being spread. Because so many services closed down, among the only places that folks could go to rest and be warm during the day was the TTC. And obviously that is a nightmare for TTC workers, but also for other essential workers, most of whom, of course, don't have access to cars to be able to come in, many of whom are racialized. They're living in parts of the city where they need to take the TTC in. And so how many people were infected on the TTC? How much did these infections spread? And then folks take it back to their households that often are where there are lots of people living in apartment buildings and unable to self-isolate. So when the homelessness is not, when people aren't able to self-isolate, when they're not able to stay home, you have a real crisis. And the city initially said that it was going to get about 6,000 hotel rooms. That never happened, in large part because they ran out of money. I think that they have about somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people in hotel rooms. They took over community centers to try to get that spacing. The city was actually taken to court, and then the province added to that lawsuit by a group of social service agencies and law firms who are maintaining that the city and the province are actually abrogating the human rights of people experiencing homelessness by exposing them to COVID, by not allowing them to self-isolate. And so the city actually, in order to stave off an injunction which would have prevented them from continuing to operate the shelters, agreed to abide by 6 feet of space and physical distancing requirements. But obviously, if your people are sleeping in an open space, even if they're 6 feet between beds, it's very, very far from ideal. It's very difficult to maintain the kind of space that people would need not to become ill. On top of that, I had a call literally a couple of days ago from a frantic frontline worker who told me that at one of the community centers that have been opened, people were sleeping on top of one another. People were packed in like sardines. The other issue that you will have heard something about is the question of encampments. Because many people who are experiencing homelessness are also immunocompromised, or they have underlying health conditions that make it dangerous for them to get COVID, they were preferring to sleep in tents. The city, it is actually contrary to United Nations and CDC guidelines to clear encampments if you don't offer people hotel rooms or other places where they can self-isolate. But the city was doing that and was clearing encampments or attempting to clear encampments in other cases. And they were not offering everybody hotel rooms. I actually went down and witnessed that myself, where I saw that they claimed at a press conference that they had offered everybody an indoor space, but that indoor space was not always offered to everybody, and in some cases was a shelter, which again can be more dangerous than a tent. Obviously, tents are not places that people should be forced to live. We should have affordable housing that people can stay in, can live in, but tents can be safer than shelters under systems of COVID-19. The point that I'm trying to make here, the other point that needs to be made, is that there is no universal testing. So testing is still only happening when there is an obvious outbreak. But because many people are asymptomatic, it's possible that the infection is being spread long before testing occurs. So here you have a situation where you have roughly 11,000 people using the shelter system in the city of Toronto, the GTA. Another 40, that's about 60% of the province's population of people experiencing homelessness. So obviously, to abrogate their rights in this way, to just ignore them, to act as though they don't matter, is clearly seriously problematic. But it is also an issue that affects essential workers, because if you can afford to stay home and do your work from home, you never end up in a space where you might become infected by this flagrant disregard for human rights, and for the way that the infection spreads, and for, frankly, public health. So it's an absolute disaster. But for me, it is emblematic of absolutely everything that we have been fighting. I've been screaming about this in every forum that I can for 2 months, but the government just merely says, well, we gave $148 million to municipalities to deal with all of the issues. That would be food banks as well as homeless shelters for the entire province. For Toronto, that amounts to, Joe Cressy told me that it amounts to $39 million, whereas at that point, the city had already spent $200 million. So you can see the cities are overwhelmed. They just can't cope. And the last thing I'm going to say, that the government had promised to only examine COVID-related business during these emergency sessions, but out of the blue, they brought forward a bill that is going to make it easier for landlords to evict tenants. And if you think about the fact that many people have not been able to pay rent, they have been building up these arrears, there's no plan in place for them, the homeless population is going to jump, there's nowhere for them to go. That's the government in a nutshell. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Rima. I really, really appreciate your passion that you bring to this. And, I remember the first time when Mike Harris was elected and they slashed welfare rates, they pushed people out on the streets, and we started to see homeless people, sleeping on heating grates and the sidewalk. It was a shock, in the 1990s to see that. And now, as a society, we become immune to those sites. And so that, the importance of elected representatives like yourself speaking out about the conditions facing those who are really at the edges is really, really important. It's part of what the NDP stands for, is being there for, those who don't always have the voice or are able to knock on the doors of power. So I just appreciate so much your work, and thank you for being with us tonight and for the work you do every day.
Thank you.
So now, sisters and brothers, we're moving on to the statement of 2 years of turmoil. And it does touch on a whole number of areas that, that this government has frankly made a mess of. And we're open to anybody that wants to speak to that. Is there anybody that, if you want to put your hand up, Susan will recognize you. And I'm just making sure. Susan, can you recognize?
Yeah, Jennifer would like to speak. Jennifer, can you identify your last name and your union, please?
Yeah, it's Jennifer Earningwine, and I'm from Workers United Local 154. And oh my God, there's so much to say on this subject matter. But one issue that I want to bring that's impacted my workplace during this crisis, but I think it's very systematic of the very issues that we're talking about under 2 years of Doug Ford, is he makes these grand promises of pandemic pay, and yet it's the most confusing thing. It's not equally distributed. Who's eligible, who's not eligible? We have over 120 PSW workers at Wood Green Community Services, and none of them have gotten pandemic pay. And our management is just raising their hands saying, well, we haven't gotten the funding, we can't afford this. And the average wage of our PSWs is $17 an hour. They are 98% women, and they're predominantly racialized workers as well. And so not only are we fighting in this round of bargaining to get them permanent, and we're also fighting for better wages, for them to have benefits, as well as so many of our lower paid workers, from maintenance to cleaners and so forth. This pandemic pay, it's really, I feel like this crisis has really brought to light the inequalities in our system, and that the heroes of this crisis are some of the lowest wage workers. from grocery store workers, cleaners, and so forth. And I mean, the crisis in our long-term healthcare system, the whole lid's been blown off of that. And it's even calling into question, should this even be privatized? We know Mike Harris played a big role in that in the mid-90s. So, and Doug Ford hasn't come out strong for, public ownership, and putting these things back into the control of the public so that we never have this kind of crisis again, because clearly the private system has failed us tremendously and it's cost us lives, both of workers, and of some of our most vulnerable populations. So I think part of this struggle, there's so much to say about Doug Ford, but I just really want to say that I think this is an excellent time to fight for better wages, especially for some of our lowest wage workers. And the problem is it shouldn't be temporary, it should be permanent. So I hope that can be part of the spirit of our fight back.
Great, thank you, sister. Is there anybody else that wants to speak to the this
Kim Nasello from OPSU Local 5111.
Hi, my name's, as Susan said, my name's Kim Nasello. I'm from LBED, which is LCBO. So, Doug Ford, his first agenda was to privatize the LCBO and make us a private entity. And through this COVID, we have become, the quote unquote essential worker. And, we are one of the, I'm not saying we're the only one, but we're one of the few that are actually bringing money into the province for him and creating money for him to bring back into the province. So for him to say that he wants to privatize us, I don't understand his agenda in privatizing us, as we are making money for him right now in this crisis. So I hope moving forward, we have our collective agreement coming up next year. It ends next year. So it's going to be a tough road. And I hope he realizes that, moving forward, that we don't need to be privatized, and he needs us to help with this province.
Thank you, sister.
Before I call on the next speaker, I'd just like to mention that if you're on the phone and you want to raise your hand, you can push *9. The next speaker is Judith Junup from the Society.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. One of the biggest concerns I have coming out of this COVID, apart from all the other horrendous things that are happening, is that we need to keep up the fight that the new Doug Ford, as he's presented in front of his media scrums every day, that he is still doing dirty business behind the scenes. And the new bill that's coming in with respect to tenants' rights and them not being able to represent themselves at the landlord and tenant board, that's huge. And so these things he's sliding these things in the background, but yet is demonstrating a facade that he's in charge. And of course, when you put that up against what's happening in the States, yeah, it looks like he's in charge, but we still need to point out that many people are suffering because of his agenda has not changed. The agenda is still there, and cuts will be coming, privatizing of our healthcare, TELUS taking out adverts in the paper about their virtual access to medical care. I just think that we need to keep the battle up. We need to keep it on COVID for sure, but all the other things that are still going on in the background, their overall conservative agenda has not changed. And I just want to reiterate that, because you can sometimes just be sucked in to think, oh, he's in charge. And then you think, oh, no, he's not. He's just, he is a chameleon. He is just fulfilling a role as an actor rather than, and keeping everything else at bay, because COVID, we're focused on COVID over here, but meanwhile over here, he's eroding rights for workers.
Great. Thank you, sister.
The last person with their hand up is Sean Blake.
Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me. John, you spoke earlier on
about how it was that Mike Harris came in the 90s and slashed and privatized. And we're now seeing the results of his privatization. And Doug Ford is doing the very similar thing. So as far as we are concerned, when we are speaking about Doug Ford in the public eye, it should be in relation to the events in the 90s and connected to this ongoing struggle in our healthcare system right now. When it is you take from hospitals, they cannot provide the services that they need. And so all these cuts will eventually lead to a lot more homelessness on the streets. It will lead to a lot more of this outbreak just continuing to just attack the healthcare system and minimize that. So I just wanted you to maybe expand on, give us a little bit more information as to the length of the cuts that happened in the 90s so that we could relate them to today's.
Okay, thanks, Sean. So I don't see any more speakers. What we've tried to do with this statement, picking up on Sean's point and the other speakers, is really remind ourselves of what, in fact, this government has done in these last 2 years. As people have said, you know, it's as if Doug Ford is reinventing himself as a nice guy. I've heard many comments back from union leaders and activists that their members are saying, oh, geez, you know, Doug's doing a good job these days. But we've got to remember, it's not that at all. I see somebody at, okay, they've muted themselves. So just to remind ourselves what the recommendations at the end of the statement are to Labour Council continue working with affiliates and allies to resist the destructive Ford Conservative agenda, that we educate and seek ongoing solidarity among affiliates across sectoral impacts of those policies on workers and communities, that we insist that the provincial government pay its share of emergency municipal funding and commit to long-term operating funding for public transit. We fight to restore workers' rights under Bill 148 and strengthen regulations that protect the public good. And of course, we've got to remind people that this guy took $1 an hour away from many of the same frontline workers he claims he thinks are heroes today. We want to call on affiliates to support the Canadian Labour Congress campaign to take profit taking out of the long-term sector, just building on the last point that was made. And we want to call for a Green New Deal to rebuild from COVID-19 and promote the principles laid out in the C40 Global Mayor's call for a healthy, equitable, and sustainable economic recovery to the pandemic, because those principles run 180 degrees opposite of the direction that the Ford government has taken us. So we'll go to the vote on that statement. And Mohammed, if you could put the poll up.
I think we have a plurality of people voting in favor, John.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're gonna turn to a really tough issue. I think we were all shocked. The world was shocked when they saw the image of George Floyd being murdered in plain daylight by Minneapolis policemen, and the response from that across the United States, across the world, has been stunning. It's the largest upsurge of civil rights anger since the 1960s. And in this statement, we wanted to respond to not only that reality, but also the reality here in Canada. So I'm going to ask the co-chairs of our equity committee, Sister Danica Izzard and Brother Ainsworth Spence, to actually read the statement for us, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So Danica, can you unmute?
Yes, okay, thank you. The world was shocked and outraged to see the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis policeman carried out while onlookers pleaded for his life. The words, "I can't breathe," which marked the dying breaths of Eric Gardner in New York in 2014, were repeated by George Floyd as the policeman's knees crushed his neck. Racist killings have been a constant reality in the United States, including Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor in recent weeks. As people's rage is reflected in the streets, President Trump pours gasoline on the flames of hatred and injustice. And while most Canadians watch in horror and disgust, we all have to understand that there is also a reality of anti-Black racism in our country that must be addressed. In 2017, Labor Council's submission to the Anti-Racism Directorate pointed to the deaths of Andrew Loku and Abdi Rahman Abdi in Ontario at the hands of police, and sadly, there are more recent examples. The submission called on the Directorate to develop a plan of immediate action to require full accountability of police, to require extensive anti-racism training of all police officers, to eliminate carding of people of color, to establish new norms for dealing with people with mental health issues, to require police to fully cooperate with SIU investigations, and to have an independent SIU that reports to civilian authority. It is recommended the document Saving Lives, an alternatives to the use of lethal force by police, published by the Urban Alliance on Race Relations in the year 2000. Against that background, the death of Regis Korchinski-Paquette added to the deep concern felt within the Black community around police interaction and personal safety. Thousands took to the streets of Toronto last weekend, expressing solidarity and grief. Black mothers and fathers are struggling to cope. They are frustrated. They are tired of calling out and finding no answers. Nobody can blame members of the Black community for losing trust in the systems and institutions around them.
Issues so clearly on the front page. All of us must demand real change, acknowledge the existence of anti-Black racism, and be ready to confront it. It is important to recognize that as human beings, we don't all start from the same place. We have a high level of inequality, including racialization of poverty and exploitation due to the color of one's skin. It is incumbent on those of you who aren't Black to grapple with the tough questions of relative privilege in Canada and our world. Every single day, families are harmed as prejudice is perpetuated through structural and institutional racism, criminal justice system, the education system, governments, news media, and through many other facets of society. For there to be any change, we must combat racism together and fight to break down oppressive systems. Today, people are fed up with reports and studies. They want a plan that is actionable and intentional. We do not have to invent that plan. It has been laid out clearly year after year. That was the goal of the Toronto Joint Committee on Human Rights when it was founded in 1947. It has been outlined by Black community leaders in explicit demands of public bodies, including schools and police services, to address systemic racism. It was detailed in our hard-hitting submission to the Anti-Racism Directorate. It was why we created Leaders Guide to Strengthen Unions, Moving Beyond Diversity towards Inclusion and Equity in 2014. And it is the goal of the Yes, It Matters campaign we have asked affiliates to undertake last year. To deepen solidarity in the labor movement and defeat the politics of division, our labor movement must relentlessly advance policies and take action that deepens inclusion and respect for all. We will challenge both ourselves and others to ensure that fighting anti-Black racism is central in our practice and is upheld by the many organizations and groups we work with in Greater Toronto. John, back to you.
Thank you, sister and brother. And the Equity Committee actually wrote the the submission to the Anti-Racism Directorate that is mentioned in this document in 2017. And I would urge people to take a look at that, go onto our website, look at the link and read the multifaceted areas of recommendations that many institutions in power were called on to change and address racism and anti-Black racism. As it also says in the document, our Yes It Matters campaign that we launched over a year ago, asking every single union in our labor council to start addressing intentionally the issue of systemic racism, having those discussions with their leadership, with their stewards and their membership, is a crucial part of how we bring the power of 200,000+ unionized workers into this conversation. Faduma Mohammed, who heads our labor community services, has convened a working group for the Yes It Matters campaign, and David Kidd from CUPE 79 is part of that working group. He's up to speak next, and then after him will be Helen Kennedy. David Kidd.
I fully support the executive board report and the recommendations. As Sean mentioned, I work on the Yes It Matters campaign with Ainsworth and others, and very proud to do so. And I am honored to not be silent tonight. This is very important for all of us, and particularly as a white male, it's very important that I address this issue along with others, both in my family and in my union. I want to speak a little bit about the experiences I've had, because even as a white male, I worked in Regent Park for over 20 years. In my union, CUPE, I had some very tough experiences of racism that Black members were facing. In Regent, what I saw every day, I worked with young people and Black residents of all ages. They experienced racial profiling and carding on a regular basis, and what I came to know as DWB, WWB, and SWB, which is driving while Black, walking while Black, and shopping while Black. One of my coworkers was able enough to have 2 cars. He had a Beater and he had an old Mercedes. When he drove the Mercedes, 8 times out of 10, he'd be pulled over by police and questioned why he was driving such a nice car. Others who, when they went shopping, that's what the SWB is. Anytime they walked down an aisle, they'd be followed. The insinuation is that things were going to be stolen. 2 experiences from my union. I'm trying to be as brief as I can. I worked for a period of time as a representative of long-term care workers. And as a lot of people have started to understand that under COVID, the conditions for long-term care workers predated COVID and have always been tough about working short. But one of the things they faced often is that many long-term care facilities are apartheid workplaces where management is all white and the frontline service is anywhere between 60% and 75% racialized. And management works on a regular basis, like Trump, to divide and conquer and keep workers divided, giving favoritism to some, but literally the group that always seemed to get the short end of the stick was the Black workers. And it undermined our abilities to improve conditions, not only the working short. I worked with a professional group where management decided that the white workers would get on a regular basis promotional opportunities and training opportunities that workers of color were denied. 2 white workers brought this to my attention, and we did a campaign with the workers involved and stopped the practice. But what I've never forgotten, at one point, we enforced management to do a report on the allegations and the incidents and the reality of what they were doing. And we came to a meeting, and the management were at the front of the room, and the staff came in to sit, and the room had an aisle in the middle and 2 seats of connections of chairs. All the white staff sat on one side of the room, all the Black staff sat on the other side of the room. It just showed dramatically what was going on. So it's very important, as John and others and Ainsworth was saying, so particularly the Yes It Matters campaign is important, because as much and as tough as what has happened in the United States, we also need to address anti-Black racism in our midst. And what I'm saying out to everyone today, and I'm doing this in my own family and among people in my union, this is the time to talk to each other. This is the time to talk within our unions, because to be silent is not going to address the problems. And it gives us an opportunity first to listen to each other and then to plan to act. I was lucky enough to be raised by incredible Black leaders like Bromley Armstrong, like Dudley Laws, and Akua Benjamin. And what I'm going to finish is with a quote from one of the leaders of us all, which is Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "Our lives begin to end the day that we are silent about the issues that matter." Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Next speaker is, it says Helen or John. I'm not sure which of you it's going to be speaking.
It's Helen.
Helen, go ahead.
Yes, I want to thank you for putting this statement out. I think it's really, really important. I think we, as John said, we've all been taken aback with the video, the recent video. There have been many videos of Black men being killed by police, but this one was extremely horrifying. But at the same time, I think we've been really, it's been an incredible outpouring of peaceful demonstrations for the most part. And I think that's also been really exciting to see that not just in the States, but around the world, there's been mobilizations. I agree with everything in the statement. I was just wondering, like the other two statements we have here tonight have executive recommendations from the Labor Council, and this one doesn't. So I'm going to suggest a few. I think that we have to also relate this back to Doug Ford, who first of all said, oh, we don't have any systemic racism in Canada, had to backpedal that statement. But in actual fact, he has cut over $2 million from the Anti-Racism Directorate. I think we can demand that that money be put back in. He has come up with this really lame thing around giving $1.5 million to support Black organizations and Black families. And that's vague enough to be reminiscent of the funding fiascos in the past. When I worked in the Lawrence Heights community, in the same position as David as a recreation coordinator, and the predominantly Black community, and mostly African, mostly East African, but the kids would be so disillusioned by their government that if there were a few shootings in the community, there would be grants all of a sudden. And they could tell after a few years of this that if the shootings increased, that there would be opportunities for grant money, which is pretty cynical. But there has to be, and the government of the day, the Liberal government, was totally horrible in terms of how they allocated money. Anyway, I would imagine that would be the same. The other thing that we haven't addressed in this statement, which is a demand that many, including Black Lives Matter, have put on the table, is the police budgets. In Toronto, the police budget is $1.2 billion. And in recreation, David will probably agree and has probably had these conversations, that it's the more money you put into recreation, the less money you have to put into police budgets. And we have had to fight in recreation for a little tiny piece of the pie where we interact with the Black community, Black youth, and predominantly, probably more than any other agency, aside from the police, because they're so biased. But it is a huge chunk of the city budget, and I don't think we have to invest that much in policing. We could invest a lot more in preventative solutions to address poverty in our communities, address transit. Just heard in the last couple of days that the transit fare inspectors are coming back. We know what that's going to mean is more targeting Black youth on the TTC. I am always struck by the fact that Rexdale, where I grew up for the first 10, 12 years of my life, is basically one of the furthest away, aside from Scarborough, in terms of transit to get onto a subway system. And it is still the most underfunded transit lines. And it's predominantly a Black community. I think what we need to do is demand that the province put money back into the Anti-Racism Directorate, invest in programs in Black communities in the city of Toronto that are living in poverty, that we can have lots of different solutions in terms of transit. Housing is in particular important in those communities as well. in addition to the homeless population that are predominantly Aboriginal. So there's lots of actually teeth that can be put into these recommendations. And I appreciate that for the most part, these are internal suggestions, but we really have we really do have concrete goals, I think, that we can put forward. Scaling back the police budget is one of them, and reinvesting that money into social programs that have been cut drastically over the last 20 years. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks, Helen. We've got a couple of speakers who have already spoken. Just to answer your question, Helen, about recommendations, is that we actually looked at the recommendations that we've been involved in probably for the last 30 years. And if you picked out half a dozen, you'd leave out 20 more that our Labour Council and its affiliates have been very explicitly involved in. Everything from the task force we created looking at racism in schools and equity in schools, to the issue, as you talked about, police budgets, police accountability, mental health issues, homelessness, racialization of poverty. So that's why we didn't start making specific recommendations, because the body of work, and there is a piece that we've just put out on our social media reminding people of the many recommendations that we've made on explicit actions. The body of work is very significant. And so we want people to go and explore that body of work and become familiar with this area, as it touches in so many different ways. So I had the first time speaker was, I thought.
Sean, yeah, I can clear that up.
Okay.
The first time speaker was Laura Thompson. Leslie Eddy would also like to speak. And then the second time speakers were Jenny and Judith.
Right, and I see Carolyn with her hand. Okay, so with Laura. Is Laura on the line now? Or do we lose her?
Hi, I think I was on mute.
Yep,
Sorry.
you're good now.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you to the Equity Committee for bringing this forward. As you mentioned, in terms of the people who need to be doing the work, it's white people, it's us. And in terms of doing that work, I think sometimes we talk about the work as if it's work, and it is. Being a better person, it is work. It is a continuing work in process. And when you are confronted with your own privilege, it can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable because you recognize and you understand the degree to which so much of what you benefit comes at the oppression of so many other people, specifically racialized and black people. But sometimes with that conversation, we don't have the conversation of what you get out of it when you do that work and continue to do that work, and that you become a better person. Because there's no way to become a better person without being anti-racist. So I think we have to have the conversation of doing the work, but also the understanding that in turn, through doing that work, it's not work without no reward. It's work in the sense that we do that work, but at the same time too, we understand that in doing that work, we understand where people are coming from. We see their humanity, we understand their experiences. And through that, there are personal gains that come out of that. And sometimes we don't have that conversation, and that through this process, you get to become a better person at the end, and you get to understand people in ways that you never understood, and you get to see more of their humanity and more of humanity as a whole. I also want to Helen mentioned some points, because we discussed this a bit yesterday at the Women's Committee meeting, in the sense that when we talk about defunding the police, it's a conversation, maybe not for today, but a conversation at some point, because just looking at it logistically and realistically with the police, I mean, the fact that our system is based on when people are in crisis, having someone show up with a gun is just bizarre. And really, if we had a better system, there's a very real chance, if not probable chance, that Regis Korchinski-Paquette would still be alive. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan, next speaker is?
Yeah, Leslie Eddy, followed by Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you for the statement. I'm a psychologist with the York Region District School Board. One thing I noticed that was missing, and I'm wondering if it can be addressed in some way. We talk a lot about intersectionality, And so, because personally I identify as a non-binary individual, and I've noticed on my social media lately, there's been a lot of issues around Black trans people and them being targeted by police. So I'm wondering if there's a way to add something in for intersectionality around queerness, Black people. We know that it's Pride Month, and then a few years ago at the Pride Parade, Black Lives Matter in Toronto started a peaceful demonstration, which really highlighted a lot about the intersectionality in the communities.
Okay, Leslie, we'll try and figure out what we can do with that in how we promote the statement and go forward. Okay, next speaker is, I think, Carolyn, is it?
Yeah, thanks very much. Carolyn from the United Steelworkers Local A300. Our executive at the Area Council discussed just this week what was happening here in the United States and in our own trade union movement. And it was a very, very important discussion. And I want to commend the Equity Committee and the fact that the Equity Committee in this Labor Council has been playing such a leadership role for so many years and really has led Labor Council to the very progressive positions it's taken on so many issues, but certainly on anti-racism, anti-Black racism. And I want to say, with all the horror that's been exposed through certainly COVID and who's dying and who the frontline workers are, and taken for just taken advantage of every day in their workplace, and what's going on in the United States, the horror is there and it's been ripped away. And as someone said earlier, we have not had such strong, broad anti-racist demonstrations since the 1960s. And the 60s was a time which really set the whole world reeling in so many ways, and so many strong movements that were able to create so much change came out of that era. And when I look at the demonstrations, I took part in the one here on Saturday. And when you look at all the demonstrations, whether in Minneapolis or LA or DC or Boston or anywhere, the multiracial character of those demonstrations was so extraordinary, and in many senses so hopeful. And I think it speaks to the fact that people are just refusing on so many levels to accept the systemic racism that is part and parcel of our society, of capitalism, and all that we deal with on a day-to-day, like our lives. And I think this is very hopeful, and I think the concrete, and obviously the statement doesn't include everything, but it's a real step forward. And I think for labor to be front and center in this movement, it's had a good history, a long history, we've had problems as well, is so important. And one thing that struck me, certainly at the demo here, I mean, there were some union flags, but there weren't a lot of union flags. And I think we within the labor movement, we know what we're struggling with, we know how we're fighting, we know the advances that we're trying to make with community. But I think it's so important to allow the broader community that is so multiracial and young in many, many senses, not entirely, that the labor movement is also there in the streets. And I think when these demonstrations are called by different organizations, they're all over Facebook, we've got to be there. We've got to show our flags and show that we're standing shoulder to shoulder to everyone, who is oppressed. And in truth, that labor should be the tribune of the oppressed. And so I think that we're doing a great job. I think we obviously can always do more. And again, commend the Equity Committee for the statement, and just be there front and center, our members, our flags, so that the community knows that the trade union movement is part and parcel of the struggle against racism, anti-Black racism, and oppressions and exploitation of every sort. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Carolyn. Next speaker.
Karen Ebanks.
Karen Ebanks.
Hi, thank you. Karen Ebanks, York Unit Owecta. I just wanted to thank Danica and Ainsworth for putting this together. I personally think it's amazing, and hearing it read aloud really brought and bred life into it. I personally really like the idea of this statement being rooted in the events that happened, as opposed to trying to go bigger and broader beyond that in the statement and to start talking about police funding and what the Ford government is doing. I like anchoring it in the events. I just had a couple of thoughts that I'm going to share. I don't know how people feel about it in terms of just adding to it in strategic places. The very first sentence, carried out while onlookers pleaded for his life for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, including that time, I think kind of heightens the image there. Where it mentions that President Trump pours gasoline on the flames of hatred and injustice, maybe to add to that more specifically on the flames of hatred and injustice with his demonization of protesters and racist tweets to kind of anchor it into something specific. Where he mentioned the death of Regis Korchinski-Paquette, maybe add in Toronto, and where stating expressing solidarity and grief that people joined together last weekend. After solidarity and grief, adding demanding inquiry into the circumstances surrounding her death, just to kind of add a little bit more to there. But I really like the way that it is rooted in those two events. I think that if we go too much beyond that, that's going to dilute the focus of what happened, and the fact that these particular events, like was mentioned, has woken up something that hasn't been seen in the 60s, since the 60s. So I think it's important to focus on that. That's my sense. And I also really like the sense of history of what this group has done so far. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And as a teacher, we always expect a teacher to help us improve language on documents. So just appreciate that. The last speaker I have is Judith from the Society.
And then John, sorry to interrupt. We will also have Jenny Ernewine. Her hand was cleared in error.
Okay, Judith and then Jenny.
I echo what Karen had said. I was concerned that we didn't have enough information on Regis, and demanding an inquiry into the circumstances that led to her tragic death. One thing I also want to mention as a white woman is I have been working with the BIPOC community in an art practice that I have that's international. And what I have done, learned in doing the work is if you're not uncomfortable, you're not doing the work. And as white people, we will never, ever understand, but we can stand beside. And we can never walk in the same shoes because it's not our experience because of the color of our skin. I have 4 kids that I raised up. I have two granddaughters, and there's a million things to worry about our kids, but what we don't need to worry about is whether or not our kids will be killed because of the color of their skin. And I really think that as the Labor Council and part maybe of the Yes It Matters working group is looking at those resources that are available for us to be able to do the work, because we need to do the work. We don't need to ask the questions. We need to figure it out ourselves. Black people do not need to explain it to us. We need to do the work. And I think that it's important that we get the right resources and the right orientation in that, because this is just wrong. What's happening is wrong. There's actually no words really to be able to discuss, to be able to describe what is happening, and the words and I did not watch what happened on TV. It's too much, but we all need to talk to our children. We all need to tell them that until Black Lives Matters, no lives matter. All futures matter, but all futures don't matter unless all Black futures matter. That's my comment, but I think moving forward, we really need to look at doing more of the work as white people within the District Labor Council.
Thanks very much. And then the last speaker is Jenny.
Yeah, I think this is such an important discussion, and I'm really glad we're having it tonight. Last Tuesday, or just a few days ago, we had our first membership meeting in my local, and we did a solidarity photo, but we also wanted to make a commitment to developing a statement and developing with our members some concrete actions. And I recognize that protesting has its own unique challenges during a pandemic. Not everyone is of the health, or if you have vulnerable members, I totally get that. But I really, really want to echo Carolyn's call for Labor to come out where we can, you know, and to do that and to help organize, because labor has so much resources, you know, and we have so much power and so much that we could help and lift up young leaders. Because I too went to that protest last weekend, and it was, I have to be honest, you know, probably one of the most inspiring and one of the most militant that I've been to. And I think, you know, we have the outrage around racism, and also in a time where, you know, like I was saying earlier, the inequalities of the pandemic are huge. And I also want to acknowledge Black workers in particular, you know, workers of color have been at some of the front lines fighting for health and safety. Like I think of Chris Smalls in Amazon, you know, who was like a supervisor, and he led walkouts because, well, we saw his open letter at the Guardian, like, you know, he's being demonized by the upper executives. And that was huge. But what I'm trying to say here is that it is so important that labor is a part of that struggle. And we have a very proud tradition. We have a proud history of this, not a perfect one, but this is the moment to step up. And I just want to share a few things. I think when I was there, one of the main slogans from that rally was the system wasn't broken, it was built that way. We have to talk about big things. There's big questions about, do we even need the police? Like, these are big questions being asked in the movement, you know, and this can sound very radical, but I just read in the newspaper today that in Minneapolis, the city council is actually discussing about should they be disbanding the police and actually replacing it with a community-oriented, nonviolent public safety and outreach committees. And actually, you even start to see the communities themselves start to orient because they feel they can't trust the police. And even in Toronto, you know, my comrade sister Laura mentioned how we treat mental health crisis with the police, and clearly we have major issues when people are dying at the hands of that, especially young Black people. And today we saw a young Indigenous woman killed at the hands of the police in New Brunswick. So people are questioning the very nature of this, and they're questioning the very nature of a system that allows this. They're questioning capitalism, you know. And so I think we need to be bold. I think we need to dream big, because I don't think the reforms are happening, and people are calling for something much bigger, and we need to be a part of that.
Jenny. So no more speakers. We're going to move a motion taking into account the comments we've heard. We'll talk to the Equity Committee about perhaps some edits on that. So Mohammed, can you put up the poll? All those in favor or against or abstain, please vote now. And while we're doing that, I am going to mention the Yes It Matters campaign again. And this went out to every one of your unions back over a year ago, asking every union to take that to your executive board, to your stewards body, to start the conversations about actually talking about systemic racism, unpacking that work. We've heard many thoughts from the speakers tonight. Our Labor Council has a huge amount of experience. Please go to laborcouncil.ca/equity and look at the resources that are on that page and the things that we're calling on all levels of government, the kinds of presentations that we've made, the support we've given for Black-led organizations, you know, back for many, many years. But it is up to all of us to go back in our unions as well and demand that this comes on the table and that we engage everybody in the power structure of our union to commit to challenging anti-Black racism in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you, sisters and brothers. Next item on the agenda is the statement cities need help. And this is, of course, we saw John Tory a week and a half ago stand up and say if the city of Toronto doesn't get significant financial assistance, it's going to be $1.5 billion in the hole by the end of the year. That's going to mean thousands and thousands of public sector jobs cut, services that are desperately needed in every neighborhood reduced, and even transit dramatically reduced. And so this is a major campaign that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has now taken on, that the Canadian Labour Congress is taking on. And we had a meeting with all of our municipal unions the other day to talk about coming in behind this. And I know we have some of the folks from municipal unions on the now with us today. Is there anybody that wants to speak to this statement? And I have to pull it up because it's
John, Lily Chang, and Rayanne Lees would like to speak to it.
okay. Lily, followed by Rianne.
Thank you, everybody. So I am in strong support of this statement. As we have heard, the municipalities are being hit very hard with the costs of this pandemic. For the City of Toronto, and I represent 20,000 members who are on the front line, both with the city as well as Bridgewater Hospital and Toronto Community Housing. We know that the city's budget is stretched. There are lost revenues of about $1.5 billion we're hearing from sources of income that are not coming in at this point in time. In addition, the city is spending a lot more money, as we've heard about trying to manage this emergency with opening up additional shelters and with costs of PPE and having staff working overtime hours in some of the areas such as long-term care and shelters. So it is very important as we move forward and try to recover from this pandemic that other levels of government come in and help us out with funding costs. If the city doesn't get the help that it needs, this is a city that employs a large number of people, and the services that will be cut in terms of social services, whether it's in recreation or in long-term care and shelters, TDC, these are all services that working people need in order to have the city recover. So I urge that we support this statement. Thank you.
Thanks, Lily. Rianne from QP 905 in the York Region.
I would just like to echo Lily's statement. The municipalities in York Region are all, we're looking at bargaining across our union. We have 6,000 municipal workers. Most of our employers are saying, don't get your hopes up. We're not looking at a happy mandate. We are in a deficit mode, and the recent announcement from Trudeau was not even close to enough. My members are concerned very much about first cuts coming to soft services, libraries, recreation facilities, parks. Our members are worried, and like Lily said, these are all services that our communities need. So I would encourage you to support this statement and then to please share it with your members. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other speakers? Okay, then we'll, the recommendations at the end of this statement is number one, Labour Council call on the federal and provincial governments to provide emergency funding to cities. Two, work with the Canadian Labour Congress and affiliates to engage union members and their families in the Cities Need Help campaign. And we're going to put up the link of that petition, canadianlabour.ca/cities need help. Work to ensure public services are expanded during the recovery process and that long-term funding for transit, childcare, housing, and social services are secured. So that's not just a bailout, that's long-term funding. 4, oppose any attempt to privatize public services or assets. And 5, demand that public investment decisions be made with a climate and equity lens. So if we could put up the vote, Mohammed. So while we're taking that vote, you know, Labor Day is 3 months from now, and the X is shut. The all of the big public events, Pride this month, Caravana or Carnival in early August are closed down, and we want to figure out what we do on Labor Day. The you know, we've been marching in these streets since 1872. To show our pride, to talk about what we do to help build a better society. And we want to make sure that in the first Monday of this September, that somehow or other labor is absolutely there to celebrate this day in the way that we have so often before, but it may not be a parade to the X. So what we want to do is to spend 5 or 6 minutes putting you into small groups to chat and come up with ideas of what could be done for Labor Day. We can, talk about taking out billboards across the GTA with the message of what we do. We could talk about the, doing a human chain up and down University Avenue, honoring frontline healthcare workers or others. There's been car cavalcades that some of our affiliates have done to support and honor their workers. And last weekend, we saw people taken to the streets and by and large, doing the social distancing that they're supposed to do. So if I can ask our staff people to invite you into a chat room and just trade some ideas. Do we try and parade on the streets? Do we just do a virtual event? Do we do a concert somewhere? Maybe Queen's Park, maybe somewhere else. What is it that you think your members would want to do to mark this incredibly important Labor Day? So if we can start that process.
Yep. So in a minute, everybody is going to see a note up on your screen, or you're going to hear a recorded message on your phone asking you to join a breakout room. We're putting people in random rooms. And as John said, we're going to invite you to take about 5 or 6 minutes to discuss that question. When you come back, we'd invite you both to enter your ideas into the general chat function. And we're also going to have a little bit of discussion when we come back. So go and be creative and let us know what you think is possible, what you think is fun, what you think will really help to celebrate and show our strength.
Aw, oh.
Hello. Wow.
Oh, I guess we're back in the main session.
Oh yeah, everybody's not.
That was short. Okay, I wasn't watching the the countdown. So if we'll ask, we'll only spend a minute or two. If there's any brilliant ideas somebody had, please let us know. Otherwise, please put it in the chat room because we do have, we also have a CLC report and reports of unions. Is there anybody that had such a great idea they want to share it right away? And I'll just check and see participants. Okay, somebody's got their
mic off.
or their video not muted. So please.
John,
mute.
if I'm gonna mute everybody and then I'm gonna unmute you. So give me 1 second.
Okay.
It's okay. I've done it, Mohammed.
Okay. So I am not. So why don't we? I see some people are putting things on chat. Why don't we try and do that? We will definitely capture those ideas. So now we're going to move to the CLC report. Josh Marias.
Hey everyone, I'm just gonna give me a second to just share my screen. Just make sure I'm sharing. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Oh.
We did a second ago.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, just wanted to say hi to everyone. I'll try to make this quick. I'll start off with just some stuff that's relevant to what we're all going through, which is the the COVID crisis. So I just want to point out our statement on the disastrous decades of underfunding and increased privatization in the long-term care sector. In our statement here, we do note that 4 to 5 pandemic deaths are in long-term care homes. The statement we have on our website also lists our 4 main recommendations, including the first one, the primary one being bringing long-term care into the Canada Health Act. At the bottom of this statement, you will find a full report with our list of recommendations. The report, Lessons from a Pandemic, it has a lot of great information. One thing I just do want to point out in the report, it's obvious that long-term care residents, many of them suffer from dementia. A lot of interesting behavior happens because of that. And I just want to pull out a fact here. 70% of racialized and Indigenous and minority staff experience some sort of physical, verbal, racial, sexual aggression. So it's just something to keep in mind. Of course, I want to touch upon some of the stuff that John and others were mentioned regarding municipal funding for municipalities across the country. I don't want to talk too much about the issue, but just about some of the tools or some of the work that the CLC is doing. So right here we have a petition, and we're doing a lot of lobbying at the federal and provincial level through our federations of labor at the provincial level. But one thing that we're doing on the ground is we're actually providing labor councils like yours resources, but also other smaller labor councils with resources, including letters to the editor, templates, and other social media assistance as well with their campaigns. Of course, just wanted to point out our anti-Black racism statement. Again, you can find it at CanadianLabor.ca. A lot has been said on the issue. One thing to, again, reinforce that in this country, there's a severe lack of resources for mental health. There's a lack of access to prescription medication. Decreased unionization in this country has been one of the contributing factors to poor working conditions. And those working conditions, they affect disproportionately racialized communities. So you'll see our statement there on the website. At the bottom of the statement, there, we do have some recommended further reading. By no means is it a comprehensive list. However, if you scroll even further down, there is a link to further resources that have been collected by some other great organizers. Things for parents to think about when they talk to their kids, podcasts, articles, videos. there's a great podcast here that I encourage people to check out. It's by National Public Radio. It's called Code Switch, which talks about how, the ways in which racialized folks, we have to, change our tone or behavior in when we engage with the different audiences that we're a part of, right? So whether that's at work, whether there's a predominantly white community, or whether that's with the people that we grew up with. So that's a great podcast too. As everyone remembers, on Tuesday, there was such a massive digital media presence, and a lot of people had a lot of things to say. Social media was just blowing up regarding anti-Black racism. Early on in the day, our Ontario office, we had a bit of a Zoom call about other things, but also obviously talking about what was going on. And what we were seeing on social media, that there was a real lack of critical look at Canada's history of anti-Black racism. A lot of the posts were about, obviously about the horrible situation with George Floyd, but a lot of it was, oh, that happens there, and there was a lot of almost, that's their problem. And so we really wanted to figure out a way to point out that this is a Canadian problem. So many media outlets were just overlooking Regis Korchinski-Paquette. So to address this, we quickly put together a series of social media shareables on the screen here. And what we designed them in a way that we call the series Say Their Names. And obviously we say their names, we have their names, but we really want to highlight that these murders happened, across the country, in places, obviously, people think of big cities like Toronto, but I mean, it also happened in places like Winnipeg, or places like Barrie, Ontario. So you can check out that. You can check out our CLC Facebook page, or CLC Ontario Facebook page. There's a post on that as well. If you're a member of the CLC Workers of Color group, you can also download those shareables there. The other thing I want to touch upon regarding anti-racism in the CLC work is that we are hosting a webinar on June 10th at 2 p.m. And it's going to be moderated by Secretary Treasurer Marie Clark Walker. Panelists will include Larry Rousseau. We're in the middle of actually confirming that Sandy Hudson will also be a panelist on that. Sandy Hudson, of course, from Black Lives Matter Toronto, and also a co-host of the podcast Sandy and Nora Talk Politics. Check that podcast out. It's really great as well. June is also Pride Month. So we do have a statement on our website about that. I won't go through the whole statement, but again, at the bottom of the statement, we have several resources for you to check out. If you can see my background, I've got a bit of a CLC Pride background. There's a ton of those that you can look at, but also there's a wonderful tracking tool that we've linked to for finding out prides across the country and where they are. There's also a great link to a set of demands by organizations in Canada in the context of the COVID crisis. Definitely check that out there. The last link on that page is a link to something that we've worked on in the last year. It's called Workers in Transition, a practical guide for union reps and trade union members. It's a fantastic document, pretty deep, lots of great recommendations. The guide is designed for trade union leaders, staff reps, local executive committee members, shop stewards, so that we can all get kind of figure out a better way to protect the rights of our trans, sisters, brothers, comrades, and ensure they have the support that they need. And I think that's pretty much it.
Great. Thank you very much, Josh. A lot of material there, lots of stuff for us to look at that our movement across the country is doing. We have the reports of committees, but before we get to that, before some other people have to leave, I just want to say this is the last night that one of the people who's been making all this Zoom possible is Skylar Maharaj, our communications and data coordinator. Skylar is gonna take off and just relax and do nothing until her baby comes in a couple of weeks. But Skylar has been helping to host this. She's just finished the latest edition of Labor Action. She's the one that does all the email, e-blasts, looks after our website, all of the other communications and data related. And I just want everybody to give Skylar a wave and have a great time in motherhood. And we know she's not going to be a stranger at all. She'll be with us still. as we when she comes back with baby in hand. Just a reminder of you know how our own Jennifer Wong handled that. I think she had a 5-week-old baby in her arms when she was doing a presentation to the Canadian Congress convention with 3,000 people in the room a little while ago. Skylar, you don't have to do that craziness. Is enough to have one crazy person in our family like that. But we just want to wish you all the best going forward with maternity. So we're looking for, is there any reports of committees? I'm trying to make sure I'm seeing it.
So Ralph Chatur from the Equity Committee. So we had a meeting prior to this where we spoke about working out issues of our podcast in lieu of the iWalk that we had postponed. We continued our discussion on caring for caregivers. Survey went out to heads of unions on Yes It Matters, asking people to document how racialized people were disproportionately being affected by COVID. And we worked on the addressing systemic racism through the strategic planning document. Thank you.
Okay, Laura, Women's Committee.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so our conversation was largely around obviously COVID-19 and how that still continues to impact our workplaces and our locals. And in terms of the conversation, it was, and recognizing that, for example, for women in the trades, a big part of being able to do their work is having childcare available. So it was definitely a reminder of the way, how all of our work ultimately comes together, both as a movement, but as working people. Obviously, with that as well, there was conversation around the last week that we've had, specifically the death of George Floyd and Regis Kurchinski-Paquette, along with other really similarly tragic incidents and deaths. So we had that conversation, including the comment about the possibility of a conversation around defunding the police and what that would mean, as well as just a conversation around Sisters of the Roundtable, and that being a possible response to what women are experiencing post in this sort of COVID-19 reality, but also the need to highlight stories of resiliency and the way that women have kind of stepped up, especially when you consider how much of what is happening and what is leading the front line is what is largely considered women's work. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Any other committees? Seeing none, are there reports of local unions? Just put your hand up and I'll recognize you.
Miguel.
Local unions to report.
Miguel.
Go ahead, Miguel.
Yes, I want to share with the all sisters and brothers for the labor movement. 4,400 just finished this Sunday, and we arrived to the tentative agreement. And we want to share with everybody. And let's see what happened. Now we are pending if our members or the membership they accepting or not this agreement. But as we arrived at the tentative agreement now with the TDSB.
Oh, with the school board for 4,400. Oh, good.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any other local unions to report? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. So thank you very much, sisters and brothers, for joining us. There's a lot of good ideas that you brought forward on the chat feature that we're going to take and try and figure out how to make this Labor Day as successful as possible. We have, we still have 3 months. Hopefully, things will improve in all of our lives. Hopefully, we'll be able to have a safe summer and be able to come back in the fall in fighting form. The things we passed today are really important to the nature of our movement. And it is, Pride month right now, and for years and years, many of our unions have had great delegations and floats and participation in Toronto's Pride Parade. It's a crucial part of the struggle that our movement went through. And there is a book called Labor Pride that was written about particularly Toronto labor and the work of individual union activists, but also institutionally our unions that came in. And in some cases, it was our grievances and arbitrations, and in fact, all the way to Supreme Court, fighting for benefits, same-sex benefits, and other benefits for our members that created, new precedents that benefited all Canadians. We know it's going to be a summer that will be still intense as people are reeling from the events south of the border, and the recognition that we as a movement also have to, as so many have said tonight, really look deeply and figure out how we become great advocates, great allies, fearless leaders on the issues of equity and challenging all forms of discrimination, but particularly anti-Black racism within our midst. And sisters and brothers, I just want to thank all of you for taking the time out again this evening. This is the third time we've done a virtual delegates meeting. There's over 80 people that have attended, and it's also being broadcast. And wish you all safety. I wish you well for your families, for your communities, for your members. Stay strong, and let's keep fighting for a better world. Thanks very much, sisters and brothers and friends.
Good night, everyone.
Night, everybody.
Night, everyone.
Okay, guys, stay safety and well. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
We're trying to throw everybody off the call so we can finish, do a quick debrief with our staff. So thanks again for joining us.
And Janice, I'll be in touch with you soon.
Susan, I think you're still the host, right?
Yes.
Are you able to end the live stream? So don't think I can.